village board during citizen participation will be allowed 5 minutes. Your subject can be anything, whether on the agenda or not. The village board should not engage in a discussion regarding comments because it was not part of a publicly noticed agenda. Upon conclusion of the citizen participation segment, members of the audience are not allowed further comment unless they are participating in a public hearing or specifically allowed by a majority vote of the village board due to involvement in an agenda item. With that being said, would anybody like to speak during citizen participation? We have an emphatic no, so I will close citizen participation and move on to consent agenda. One motion and a second will approve all the following items. Any item may be pulled from the list and voted on separately. And we will be pulling number 2 from the agenda.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda minus number 2.
I'll second that.
I do have one quick question on number 4, though. Are we good on the cross-connect? I know that's been a problem in the past.
Yep, we've been going on that for a couple of years now.
We got a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to miscellaneous business.
Scott? Okay, for number 2, we can approve it. We just need to pull LDs from the list, and we'll bring that into. Okay, thank you.
So then what I'd be looking for is a motion to approve number 2 with LDs pulled from the list.
I'll move to approve that.
Second.
I have one question in regards to that, the class, and I'm just curious. The new Image Laser Skin Solutions is a Class A liquor license. I'm just curious.
I can answer that. Okay.
Could you?
Yeah, it's a service facility, and with a Class A license, they are allowed to serve up to 2 3-ounce samples of wine per person. So just like if you were to go to the grocery store, which has a Class A license, and get a sample, that's how they get around that. But they're not actually, yeah.
I got it.
Got it.
We got a motion and a second on item number 2 in the consent agenda. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. On to miscellaneous business, 2023 budget review session, capital budget and draft capital improvement and funding plan, proposed capital budget and capital budget funding plan. We do have representation from Ellers today, so forward.
There we go. Can you hear me now? Yeah. You should have some tables in your packet, but then I also have a presentation, so if you want one, take it and pass it along.
Is this presentation not available in time to get in the packet?
Yeah, it's just highlights of the tables.
Oh.
So, yeah, I've just kind of gone through to maybe point eyes as you look through the tables, so.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, it looks like everybody who wants one, has one. With that said, kind of what we're talking about here are a few items. This is workshop 1 of your capital improvement plan budget. So basically, I've received all of the capital improvements that you're looking to do 2023 through 2027. We've gone through, and similar to other years, identified how those may be funded. So you maintain an assigned fund balance within your capital improvements fund, where you may be earmarking some dollars for these future projects. So we go through and kind of identified how we would fund those using fund balance, using debt, or operating surpluses. So understand this process. We then will come back and have kind of a finalization of this plan. So that gives you time as a board to go through, review, make some prioritizations, et cetera, as you see fit. So ultimately, this is probably seen as what you could call an all-in approach. identify the impacts, and then see if you want to make some adjustments from there. So we'll walk through those impacts as we go through this. But just identify here, this is kind of the first crack at it, if you will. So let's make this an open discussion as much as possible. With that, some of the major things here, as I've laid out in terms of the agenda, is that we're going to look through the future value projection, in particular kind of the TID 3 closure and impact. And then we'll look at the current debt and capital finance fund, or capital improvement fund balance. Those positions, those kind of are launching points in terms of the parameters that we're operating within. Then we'll look at the capital budget and the impact, and then kind of a what's next. So moving into this first table that you were provided, so this is your equalized value projection model. So just kind of, I'm going to work bottom up from this presentation. So this is slide 3 that says future value projection, table 1 at the top. Understand that for the future, we basically assume a 5-year average discounted at 50%. So we try to go a little conservative when it relates to the changes in your equalized value. You may wonder, why is that important to kind of project? Is ultimately that's where you find your tax rate, is that TID out assessed value. So ultimately we're going off of equalized here, but just understand this is kind of where we can make our projections into the future tax rate. So that's kind of what we've done generally. Now also you'll see some manual adjustments in terms of the TID out equalized value, so that's the bottom of this table, both in 2023 and then later. So these are TID 3 and TID 4 closures. I just want to identify that presuming you've adopted your TID 3 termination resolution, you would be eligible then to move that increment essentially from TID in value to TID out value. Again, why is that important? Now that hits your tax rate. So one, you may see a decrease depending on how that tax levy is adjusted based on that adjustment to the TID out value. But beyond that, you also get a levy limit adjustment, and that's an allowable adjustment. So you'll see on the presentation that I just handed out, I do walk through what that projection is for the levy limit adjustment. So it says allowable levy limit adjustment of $100,000. Understand that that is essentially your final increment value of $35.6 million, taken by your total TID out value, and that's $39 million. And you essentially get 50% of that as your percentage to allowable increase. Why is this important? So basically, you can identify, based on the closure of this TID, are there additional services based on the growth that we've experienced in this TID that we need to continue in terms of our operations. So the state, as you may know, each year only allows you that percentage of net new construction to kind of be generated in terms of increasing your budget. Now you get this one-time adjustment that can be base building. So we typically recommend that communities either claim the full amount of this or reduce their debt service levy adjustment. And why would we say that? Is because that debt service levy adjustment can come off and then come back on as much as you would like in terms of how much general obligation debt you have outstanding. But you cannot go back and claim your allowable TID levy limit adjustment outside of the unused amount, which you actually would have to take another vote on. So it's kind of like admitting, oh shoot, we should have taken this when we originally had the crack at it. So just understand that this will be a continued conversation throughout all three phases of this discussion. I just wanted to make sure you kind of are preliminarily understanding what some of the math is here, and then kind of this can help fuel the discussion in terms of when we want to take on debt and how we're structuring that debt. So we've done all of this with this important feature and timely feature in mind. On the next page, looking at the current debt position, so this is table 2 in what was provided. Basically, we're looking at that TID 3 debt that's dropping off as we look at 22 to 23. So you can kind of see that reduction of about $600,000. Understand those weren't levy dollars, right? So those were just from tax increment district number 3 increment revenues. So ultimately, the taxes within that district we're paying for the debt, that drops off as a 1-to-1 ratio. So understand that that's kind of not a debt service levy change.
But our payments though, according to what I got people here smarter than I am on this, but it looks like our general obligation payments drop almost by 45% after 22 because of that.
Right, it's the TID 3 debt. Yep. But it was, if you see the that negative column that identifies TID 3, so that's 3 columns in, just identify that's kind of why you're not really seeing a drop in the net tax levy, because that was paying for all of that geo debt service. So the other item to kind of identify is that ultimately from 22 to 23, right now it increases $23,000 in terms of that difference from those years' debt service levy. So that's additional debt you've taken on in 20 and 21. And then also decreases starting in 2026 and 2028. So ultimately, that's kind of shown on a later page in terms of what each year's difference is. But if you were to kind of look at that simple math, 26 is kind of a larger drop off of 40-some thousand, and 28 at 80,000. So ultimately, when we're getting this plan information in terms of, hey, these are the projects we're looking to fund, those are years I'm looking to insert debt, right? So I'm trying to make that debt service levy as level as possible, understanding that you can't always control tax rate based on your values that you create, but you can control how much annual debt service you have. So that's why we structure it with the initial goal of that in mind. So you'll see that later on, and I'll walk through that individually in terms of the future debt plan. And then understand all of this includes the caveat that TID 4 is paying its own way. So you'll see that column there that says less TID 4. It's going to take a few years for some of the TID increment to generate. The good news is you do have some positive momentum in that there has been developments happening, and we can walk through those as you'd like. But understand that right now our current estimates kind of have that positive cash flow starting in 2025. So we may have to offset some of this TID 4 debt with outside levy, meaning the TID 4 can't support itself until 2025. This is based off kind of current estimates. We're going to get into this more into the future phases. So just kind of understand that these will become kind of more clear as time passes. I guess, is there anything else you guys kind of wanted to discuss with TID 4 before I kind of move on from that? Looking on the next page, and we can move to the next slide as well. This is kind of starting at the bottom of this is a 2-page table that I provided you, because this is, we want to provide the full picture, understand there's really no better way to identify this. So I'll start from the bottom, actually, so it'll be the second page of this table, where the, capital fund balance, you basically have about a total of 2.9, but you have about a total of assigned is what we're trying to identify for those future projects of 2.1 million. This is down at year end due to the village kind of paying for that full square project, but understand it's our understanding that you're receiving $750,000 in grant funds to ultimately replenish this fund. In addition, the other highlight that in talking with staff that we wanted to identify here is there's actually $350,000 reserved in this capital fund. This is about halfway through that fund balance source at the bottom list for the Highway 20 water improvements. And this is going to be one of the decision points that I identify later. It may be worthwhile identifying, do we want to use this for that future project, or let the water take on debt? Understand what you're looking at today is the water taking on debt, more of a impactful approach, I'll say, because certainly you could choose to use that money, or you could choose to kind of reallocate the $350K to other projects. Basically, do you want to use that for a tax rate or tax levy control versus the water control? So we can kind of get into that. I want to talk about it once we see the all-in impact for the water utility, so that you can kind of understand, even with the water utility taking on debt, it's still in kind of a financially strong picture assuming, future operating increases don't, kind of go haywire. So with that, we'll go to the next page of the slides. We can stay on this, table though. Some of the highlights, moving up the table is that we've projected 2023 and 2025 borrowings. The large projects that are kind of moving those, moving the village into those borrowings would be, fire capital of $900,000, some parks projects that I've highlighted here of the impoundment redevelopment and the play structure at $430,000, and then streets, the school street project of $300,000. So these are, just wanted to highlight some of these projects that we are borrowing for in the next couple of years. The other item that I wanted to identify here, and while it's missing from this page and should be, and based on how we present it, should be on here, it is a one-to-one impact in terms of it won't impact the actual tax levy, is that the Highway 120 multi-use trail, Phase 2 is actually a bipartisan infrastructure law project, meaning there's a grant component that should be showing that it's paying for itself. Understand that wasn't explicit on the list that I provided, but the non-grant portion is shown on here of about $200,000. And then the last thing is utilities. For now, we identify fund balance for some of those smaller annual costs. Understand this may change in the future. Once we do the operating section, we'll probably do it from annual surplus. So ultimately, it's the same place, right? You're paying leftover cash from the annual, the annual performance of each enterprise fund, or you're just paying what ultimately is already on hand. But we do identify that later. So if you're kind of comparing this to previous financial management plans, you might say, how come you're not showing user fees for some of these? The reason is ultimately we're going to show that later when we do the operating side, but it's all coming from the same, individual enterprise funds, cash balances. Moving on, so we can kind of go to the next table that was provided to you in the next slide that I just handed out. So this identifies kind of how we're funding those, what categories or departments, we're funding in each of these issues. And so you can kind of see basically how we've sized this. One of the things, that could change should we decide to move the water project, for example, from actually paying for it out of the capital improvement fund balance, is your water portion would decrease significantly for the 2023 borrowing. So just understand that that would be the only kind of change to this table based on that decision. But moving to the next table, but staying on this slide, if you don't mind moving to table 5. Again, the structure that we've used for allocating this debt service, in particular, I'm talking about the levy portion of both of these borrowings, is we're targeting that decreasing future debt service each year. What I mean by that is we can control that levy and how much you're paying annually. We not always can control our future values. So ultimately, we want that decreasing each year, but please understand, as you take on new projects, it's kind of hard to reduce that initial impact. You're going to have to pay interest at some point. You're going to have to pay principal at some point. We're also trying to structure this so that we have attractive maturity sizes. So ultimately, that'll reduce your interest costs if we're giving the bidders something that they'll like. So these large, banks and underwriters that'll be bidding on these future borrowings, we want to make sure that we have attractive maturity sizes. So all that means is basically you'll see the total principal be north of $100,000. So generally, that's kind of where underwriters like to bid. The higher, the better. Just kind of understand that. But also, we're constrained on two sides, understanding that we want to make sure your debt service levy is not increasing too fast. And then lastly, that lowest cost of financing. So understand too, the faster, we put principal, the lower the interest cost. So while we're trying to achieve all of these other guidelines, so kind of picture the Star Wars scene where we got walls closing in on us on both sides and we're just trying to get out. So that said, the other items is that this impact, and we can move to the next, actually 2 tables, I believe. Apologize, table 7. Yep. So you'll see the existing debt on the left on table 7. On the right is these proposed issuances. So basically, this is the impact of how we've structured this. And the one column that I would just highlight here is that levy change from prior years. So this is halfway through your orange columns there. And like I said, when you're taking on new money, so you're not refunding something, of course, at some point, you're going to have to increase this unless you have a significant drop-off in the debt service levy. So what we've seen here is with the issuance in 2023, we do have a significant increase in 2024. Again, we could try to stagger this, but then your increases will be longer and your interest costs will be greater. So it's kind of, right now what we've shown is basically the lowest cost of financing, meaning we're trying to amortize this quicker and take the jump in terms of that debt service levy. Now understand that also comes with thinking about how is this TID 3 closure affecting our value and overall tax rate. Do we just want to do that Band-Aid approach, understanding that we are going to have kind of a bigger pie now of value in terms of the total tax rate. So this is the approach we've taken for now. So you'll see that increase in 24 and 26, 23. Again, this is really that increase. The first increase you see in 2023 is a continuation of your existing debt. There's nothing we're doing to change that. But the 24 and the 26 increase are due to the new borrowings. Understand too, we could structure out the 26 increase. One mechanism there would be to kind of capitalize the interest in the 2025 issue. However, again, now you're punishing yourself on the cost of issuance, right? So you're issuing more debt just to kind of keep that tax levy the same. So ultimately, would the long-range impact be greater? It usually is and was here. So just understand that basically we've said we're not going to capitalize interest. We are going to pay for this, take the slight levy increase in terms of debt service. Again, when it comes to the levy limits, you're allowed to increase that by whatever debt you take out. So those have no statutory limitations in terms of your annual increase to the levy limits. You do have a total general obligation debt outstanding capacity though. So the max tax rate on this sheet you'll see is $1.25 per thousand, and there's no additional debt service levy capacity until 2039. I think this is the biggest component of this. This basically says if we're looking to take on all of these projects right now in this time frame, our future projects beyond 2027 will need kind of a serious, you may have to push those back. So understand what those large projects are that you're tackling now. Understand that, we could certainly reduce some of the annual payments on the 2025 loans. But again, this is a significant amount of borrowing, mainly the fire capital. There's some large dollar amounts here. And if we're taking on all of these, we do have limited capacity. So you'd probably see, again, if we're looking at 2 years from now, financial management plan, we may have additional, increases in that debt service levy. So again, just kind of understand where we're going there in terms of the future debt capacity and kind of identifying how we're structuring this. So certainly we could backload some of this, but there's really not a lot of room here based on the dollar amounts. The next table, actually just moving to the table, we don't need to move slide. I just wanted to identify that borrowing capacity and just make sure it's understood. You still have plenty of capacity here. You're just over 50% with the 23, and then again the 25 borrowing. Your rating kind of is indicative in terms of how they feel about this. They want you to stay around that 50%. So you give yourself that additional capacity. Some of the other drivers in terms of how we got close to this, understanding some of the TID 4 related debt that's been taken on in terms of that is general obligation debt. So just kind of understand that that's part of this in terms of the existing debt that's driving these increases. But again, this plan isn't taking on too much debt in terms of the overall debt capacity. We would be more concerned with how does the village tackle future projects up through 2039. And then on the last page, this is where we identify this all-in. So understand that what we're showing here is all of the existing debt for the enterprise funds and their annual payments, and then the proposed debt. So these have water components and sewer components. What we're trying to say is, all right, can we keep the lights on and also pay for our debt service? So can we pay our operating costs and pay for debt service? Both utilities are in a good position to tackle this plan, absent of any larger operating increases. Now, we just got the 2021 audit today, I believe. So I would have to, we could update this number with the 2021 net revenues, and we'll do that for the next meeting, which is in August. But just understand that both utilities, we've gone through recent rate studies in 2017 and 2019. So we've kind of planned for this the entire way, and now we can kind of approach these as more inflationary increases as needed. That said, the water item is what I wanted to focus on. If we remove, let's say if we decide to pay for that water item in cash, this only decreases that burden, which the burden truly isn't there. So again, if there's a water project in the future beyond 2027 that we should be concerned about, we would need to know about that. But you are building that capacity. You'll see 2027, you have $400,000 of additional debt service capacity. So even with a large project, you can still take that on by issuing debt. This may kind of ask the question then, and this is what my last slide gets to on the packet that I handed out, is ultimately, do we want to reallocate that $350K that's identified for the Highway 20 plan to a different capital project that would be an impact to the tax levy, because we have smaller margins there, and the water can actually handle this debt service, but the tax levy, as I've indicated, cannot. So, do we want to reallocate that to fire capital? Do we want to reallocate that to something parks? Whatever it is, it almost doesn't matter outside of whatever messaging you want to tackle with that, or divvy it up by their project costs and allocate it percentage-wise. But
my question to you about that is, if we're talking about it can handle it, the water utility, are we talking about that water utility then going up, or is? Because at this point, we're trying to not make that happen.
Correct. Yep. So that's a great question. This shows that the water utility would not need to increase rates to handle these projects outside of however we feel about the future operations, which will be tackled in later phases. But just understand that unless we have another employee, we're hiring larger frequent expenses. So we have well rehabs, we have water tower paintings, we have these infrequent one-off expenses. But that said, that can usually be mitigated with fund balance, and also the water rates were designed to normalize those infrequent expenses. So that's why you'll see, this capacity. So basically what this says is the water utility can handle issuing debt for the Highway 20 project.
Or DNR, they're not coming to us right now with any kind of major changes. I mean, I know that that's hard to predict, but you don't hear anything coming down that identifies any major expenses we have in our water treatment plant or anything like that would worry or concern about these numbers?
Staffing is going to be our next major concern. That and obviously inflation, everything. I mean, we're paying 3 times as much for chlorine as we used to, so, it's things like that. But staffing is going to be turned down the road.
I have one question. You mentioned something about either paying it through the water utility or through the taxes. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, please? Because
Sure.
What my concern is, Scott hit it, is that I don't really want to see the water bills go up.
Mm-hmm.
But if there are costs and if they can be attributed to a tax bill, then people can at least write some of that off. They can't write off their water bill.
Not anymore. With increased deductions on your federal income taxes, most people can't itemize
And I think I'll jump in
Sure.
and address, so that $350,000 we're referring to has been designated in the fund balance for that project since I've come on board. So that is prior to 2011, that was set aside for that, and I never clearly understood what the intent had been at the time, and I don't know if that really matters at this point. It's your decision now, but I wasn't sure if the intent was to loan the money to the water utility or to actually pay for that project through taxes rather than through water funds. So that's why that's there, and that's why we have that decision in front of us.
Wasn't there a major $7.5 million project that was coming at us with, phosphorus levels at one point?
That's the sewer utility though, not the water. The only thing I will add about the 350, we keep talking about, that project right now is in design and likely going to exceed the 350 mark, just so we're all aware too.
If it exceeds the 350, what's the impact on rates? When you say it can absorb, how much can it absorb?
Yeah, so, you're looking at right now with the 2020 net revenues, the annual debt service you can absorb. So right now your min there is probably $213,000. What that attributes to a principal amount, Jason can provide us a conservative estimate and we can update this. So one of my kind of what's next points would be, we can show this two ways basically going forward. Show it with the water issuing debt for this and the 350 reallocated. The only kind of input I would need is basically what do we want to attribute that 350 to? And if we don't care, it can be allocated throughout, just basically, hey, we're going to put it towards whatever the 2023 borrowing is, and we're going to try to reduce that $200,000 impact in 2024 to the debt service levy. So that's kind of where we could go, but ultimately we can continue from this point showing it, the water utility getting that 350 and paying for it, and the water utility not. This is showing the water utility not, and what this shows is they can absorb that. They can absorb more too. It's just kind of what would scare me or keep me up at night operating the utility would be beyond 2027, which of course I know as well as you can't really control the DNR's future decisions in terms of what they may mandate from the treatment facility.
I think then you have a better argument if you have to go to the commission for a rate case. Science issue then, not we just decided to go do something.
Right. Yep.
I'd like to see it both ways. I'm a little leery of debts or of tax levy funding a utility when we or a rate mechanism in place. That said, I don't want rates to go high either, so it's a balance.
So beyond that, some of the other, and I would focus your eyes now on what I handed out, the last page, the what's next slide, is we've already kind of talked about, the reallocate. The one thing I'll just say is kind of these decision points don't have to be tonight. The next scheduled kind of completion of the capital improvements phase of this would be the 8-1 meeting. So you guys will have some meetings to kind of talk about this reprioritization, any revisions you may want. Do we want to adjust the project costs for Highway 20 water portion, things like that. How do we want to apply the levy from the TID closure? Again, I'll say it's kind of use it or lose it in terms of claiming that amount, but that also means we could claim less for debt service. That's probably not going to be a reality based on the TID 4 performance. You're going to have to claim to be able to pay for what you can until TID 4 is able to cash flow. That said, the TID 4 can then you can allocate future to have the TID 4 pay for that later. But that said, you may have to float TID 4 some money until 2025. But how do we use that allowable levy? Again, my recommendation is claim the base building as much as you can, and we'll do the debt service adjustment for kind of what's needed. And then lastly, do we wanna execute all projects in this timeline? So ultimately, is there any navigation in terms of timing of the projects, navigation in terms of projects we're not gonna do it all? This is the all-in approach again. So you guys, have, ultimately, we kind of need some information back by July 18th. I just wanted to provide that context so you guys can have some, discussions amongst yourselves up until that point. And then staff, of course, will be discussing whatever kind of decisions you may have. And then again, we'll provide the final one. Now, if the final one needs to be in an optioned form, that's fine, in terms of we're showing it with the water doing debt, with the water not doing debt. I'm just saying, some inputs are needed before that, August 1st meeting. And then beyond that, we'll meet again to go through kind of the final financial management plan that kicks off your budget season, because we do operating and capital, which will basically give you the full tax levy for the next year, the full levy limit worksheets, in moving into the future and understanding what we're claiming for what, et cetera, expenditure restraint compliance and everything like we do every year. But just understand that we're trying to get the capital budget under control and just finalized first, so that we can make these decisions in terms of future borrowing and how that leads into operations.
So I don't expect answers in detail now, but for those follow-up conversations. So I pulled, can you go back to table 8? I want to focus on 3 things. One is, actually, go back right, please. Yeah, that's good. So I want to focus on 3 things. One is the percent of limit, and the other 2 are the first items on the 2023 general obligation bonds and the 2025. And I pulled the same table from our August 12th conversation last year. And 2023 number is 1.1. It's almost triple here, and then the 2025 number is 585,000, so it's almost quadrupled here, and that's pushed our percentages a lot higher. And none of our percentages last August went above 50%. And so I get that you said this is all in, and we've got to decide what that project schedule is. And so my question for, I guess, the detail that I'd like to look back at, and again, don't have to get into it tonight, you can email me or whatnot, but how much of it is things that have come up due to the infrastructure, the fire requests, that maybe things that we didn't know in August of last year. So 10 months ago we didn't know. What changed so dramatically? And then we can look at, then I think that information will help us drive that priority on the schedule.
So I think that's going to have to come from staff. And I can just give you a quick synopsis, not complete dollars, but there's a lot of dollars in there in the borrowing for that bipartisan infrastructure, things that we're applying for. And based on conversations with Jason, it does not sound like we're going to get all those. We might be lucky if we get one. I think there's about $800,000 in the borrowing for that alone.
So we just applied for $4 million worth of projects, which we're on the hook for 20% if all 4 projects were to get funded. Highly, highly unlikely. It sounds to me like we're going to be lucky to get one project selected.
And so these numbers assume that we got all 4?
There's 4 projects in there. I think we budgeted $200,000 each in the 4 projects that are in the current 5-year.
So that's $1 million of what I was saying here.
Yeah,
Okay.
so that's one thing that could be addressed. I think we maybe would be able to just budget for one based on what we're hearing at this point.
But not to cut you off, but we're supposed to have some answers in July on that. So hopefully it coincides with the process.
And then fire and rescue, I know Joe is here. I don't know if he wants to speak tonight. If you guys want him to speak tonight, he did come for this item. But the board has not approved that budget, and I think we used the budget like a worst-case scenario at this point. So when is your board reviewing it, Joe? So next Tuesday, his board's reviewing it. So what I was gonna suggest to the board, and I kinda wanted to get direction what you wanted to see, but I think that we're gonna have to, so between the 18th, we actually only have one meeting scheduled, so I'm hoping we might be able to push Brian to the 19th, because there is no meeting on July 4th. So we have a meeting on June 20th and a meeting on July 18th. So I think we still, like June 20th, I think we should have this back here to look at these projects a little more in depth and prioritize them. I know there's some parks projects in there too. So I don't know if there's anything specific you're looking for from staff members, and I think at that point we might have more direction from EMS as well.
Yeah, I think, so I appreciate you doing it all in, because I like to see the worst case scenario from a debt perspective. That's good. And this helps to understand what changed so radically, and that makes, I think there's the worst case scenario, but then there's what do we think it really is. I'd like to know what that is, because there's no way that, like you said, we're going to get all 4 projects. So if we think probably get 1, then maybe show 4, and then we got to take care of the fire and rescue needs. That'll help us prioritize that. I think just for that detail or that on there, because I also don't know when I look at those schedules, hey, could we slide something out, or is this a would be nice? If we slide it out, are we kicking a main? Because my other, I guess my last comment or question for you is, how realistic do you think your forecast? Some of the ones next year, like 3% range. I hear a reserve chairman say that he wages being high, inflation, and that he's going to raise interest rates. I'm like, these guys don't know what they're doing. So I'm worried about if we're having this worst case scenario, our carrying cost of capital.
Go back here. Great question. If you can predict a year out, let's make some money. But that said, you know, it's all about, while we want to be conservative, again, it's also an understanding of there's a decent and consistent demand for rated municipal securities. I think the fact that you're doing these exercises, the rating agency actually identifies that this is a plus. You're going to get a bunch of value now added to your TID out. I'm feeling good about your rating. Those are 2, quantitative factors I can speak to, feeling good about your rating. And again, you have control over your capital improvements fund balance, and we can explain the 750 coming in. So 3 factors. The rating's going to be good. In terms of, how does this look for, if we want to look at doubling whatever the estimated interest rates are, we can ultimately do that. I don't know necessarily if it would change the amount you're borrowing for in a more direction. It may probably just take things back. You may say, you know what, we're going to push this project. It's just become too crazy. Or we're going to apply we're going to advance some of these assigned capital fund balances that we reallocated for other purposes. So to that end, I could see this going down if we're more in a nightmare interest rate scenario. But ultimately, it's the village's document. If you want me to go 200 basis points, 400 basis points, I can do that. I'm just saying in terms of how the decision framework will change at that point. So I think how this is built is in a way of, hey, this is the worst case approach. Understand too, we're showing that 350K, there's the other item here is this is going to go down no matter what because of the Highway 20, 350K. I didn't allocate that to anything, under this. So if we choose to allocate it to something else, that's going to reduce the borrowing and the debt levy. If we choose to just keep it with water, that's going to reduce that as well. So 350K and maybe 400K for the bipartisan infrastructure ones. We're already at 750,000, which will probably bring you closer to that 50% debt limit. So, yeah.
One thing I just wanted to add before we conclude talking about the capital projects is, the 100K levy increase from TID. We can't just assume all of that's gonna be able to be used for capital projects. We are doing a salary study. We know that with inflation, wage adjustments as a result of that salary study, and some staffing needs that might be coming forward with the operation budget. So, some of that certainly will be able to go to capital, but I don't know that we can count on all 100,000 at this point, but we'll have. So is the board okay with having a budget workshop on the 20th to talk a little further in detail with department heads about the projects and prioritizing? June 20th, the next board meeting. We'll add that. Was there anything else for Brian?
All right, moving on to consider requests from Republican Party of Walworth County to adopt a resolution relating to election administration, donations and grants. Lori had received a letter from Walworth County, about potential negation of any kind of future donations.
The Republican Party approached Walworth County and asked them to pass that resolution, which they did. And basically, it is a resolution stating that the governmental body will not accept any donations for administration of elections. So while Walworth County adopted that, that does not cover us as a separate municipality. So the Republican Party contacted all the municipalities asking them to consider that same type of resolution for their municipalities.
But in perspective, we received pens and sanitizer as our donation.
Yeah, the only time that we have accepted any donations that could be considered under this administration of elections would have been during the COVID time when we were suddenly hit with a need for PPE that we could not get. We did have some local companies or businesses give us some face shields, masks, gloves, cleaners, pens, because we were doing single-use pens. So we can pass the resolution. It's not something that we see here a lot. It's up to the board if you want to take that final step, policy, make it however you'd like to do it.
Walworth County actually incorporated it right into their code. They actually adopted an ordinance to put it right in their code, so you guys could do that if you wanted, or you could just do more of a resolution or, changes by the year.
What Walworth County did was they offered.
It's a little bit, they termed it a resolution, but Walworth County actually adopted an ordinance. So they provided you with a resolution that was drafted by the Republican Party that lays out their arguments for why they'd like to see this done. But it's not, and they term it in terms of a resolution that they're looking for, but like again, Walworth County actually is an ordinance. So I think they'd probably take what they can get, honestly.
I guess could we do this as
I'm not opposed to the idea. I think, election for public office ought to be funded publicly. I don't think that I would pass the wording here, though. I think it needs to be more dispassionate.
That is why in this item it is for at some point have staff and our attorneys maybe put something together that has less emotional verbiage in it, and we can even have it part of one of our next meeting.
And I would not want to preclude people donating supplies, time. We've had all the people who come and they volunteer, and just would be very careful about it. Now, whether it should be a resolution, should be an ordinance, should be a policy.
That's what we're kind of thinking. Maybe staff work with the legal counsel and come back with something formal with it.
Good to me. Yeah, this is
too much of a solution for a problem that doesn't exist.
Okay, I can work with Chris, we can come back with something, probably not on the consent, because you'll want to review it. Thank you.
Thank you. Consideration of mutual aid agreement with Walworth County for emergency related, to public works. And when we come up on these agenda items, and we've got a memo, I'm hoping that everybody here has read it, we understand it. If you have any questions for staff, please ask those questions at this time.
Yes, please, and if you note in the memo there, if you want to authorize me to sign it, that might be appropriate.
Make a motion to approve the mutual aid agreement with Walworth County and authorize Jason to...
I'll second that.
I have a question, obviously. I guess my question was with number 7, and I probably don't understand it properly, about insurance. And I guess the note that I wrote for myself here is item 7. I said, we already have insurance, do we not? So my question would be, does the Emergency Services District, are they also going to need to okay it, or are they going, how is that going to work? As far as with the village as an entity and the emergency services body.
Is that effectively they'd be covered under your policy when they're operating within, essentially you're sharing folks, so, and equipment. So as they move around to various jurisdictions, then they're going to be covered by those jurisdictions' policies. And that's why Jason actually checked with the insurance folks to make sure there was any concerns about that, because that was one of the things I flagged to make sure that they didn't want to have a problem where the insurance company threw up a flag down the line.
That's fine then, thank you.
The discussion? A motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, direction to staff on Highway 20 West project, Thomas Drive to Town Line Road, tentatively scheduled for 2026.
Okay, so DOT reached out, another section of Highway 20, somewhere in 26 through 28, Thomas Drive to the west. It was last surfaced in 2004, and it's going to be another resurfacing project, basically mill it and fill it, mill out the pavement and place new pavement. And so their question to us is, are we interested in doing anything in conjunction with that project? Utilities are in pretty good shape in that section. We did them last time, actually, so that's good news. The big question for you would be, do we want to consider any more pedestrian accommodations in that stretch? Currently, sidewalk is on the south side and ends at Beulah Avenue. We could continue west with that. I will tell you, at this point, WisDOT is not interested in paying for any of this because it's a resurfacing project, so their comment to me was that if we're interested, it would have to be on the village to pay for those accommodations. They're going to do the pavement, they're going to do some curb repair, they're going to do pedestrian ramp upgrades, but not any additional accommodations that don't currently exist.
So as far as with the pedestrian ramp upgrades, then they're not going to be doing, if we want to, we're the ones that put in the flashing warning lights for crossings, correct?
Correct. They would only upgrade anything that is existing today. They would just get it to current ADA standards.
And I guess the big question I had is that I've never heard of this company. Has this company ever done work in the village? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm looking at the.
Yep. So this was DOT that reached out, Department of Transportation, and where was I going to put this? Oh, I had asked about curb and gutter, and they have no plans for any additional curb and gutter either. Currently, the curb and gutter ends at around well 8, which would be west of Beulah Avenue quite a bit, but they have no plans for any improvements in that manner.
Because on the north side there, where it goes to 45 miles an hour, that's the town, right?
There is actually across the street from well 8 is the location where it does transition to the town, correct?
but the south side's the village, so, I mean,
All the way to town line, yes.
you know, I know in the summer, there's some bike and pedestrian traffic out that way, headed down to the lake. Would the town possibly be interested there for pedestrian accommodation? Not it, but, you know, asking.
Yeah.
Bring it up as a topic of discussion next time we meet.
Okay. Essentially, what DOT is looking for right now is, you know, some sort of verbal, hey, this is what we're interested in seeing, and, you know, obviously, we have to go through the design process, and it's a multi-year project.
When you talk about that stretch of property, we have nothing over there in curb and gutter, but we do have a school that butts up to there. And there are some future improvements that are coming down the line with the Heritage new building and potential library structure that would accommodate with those needs. There's on our futures map an identification of that roadway coming all the way through into Highway 20, and we do have an easement for that to allow to happen at some point. Not that we're going to do that, but if it was something we'd want to do, then I think we'd want to continue curb at least to that area, and even if it wasn't to the full extent of a curb and gutter, at least to do something like we did down ES to accommodate the rolling edges of the sides of the road, kind of maintain it a little longer.
And I did float that idea to DOT, and both actually ideas, the hybrid curb and gutter like we did on ES, and including the extension of West Street in this project, and they were interested in both, and, you know, thought they would both fit within the project. Just comes back to our conversation earlier of prioritizing funds.
I think that it's something we should really start looking at, and it's something we should maybe start having some conversations with our engineers about. Just having kids that are in the school there, and identifying the fact that there is some very limited access points for that school, and there's a massive amount of congestion both morning and afternoon. Having that extension of West Street may be something that helps with any kind of safety concerns. Extension of the sidewalks through that area, there's a lot of kids that have access then to the school for walking distance. It all kind of makes sense on a safety standpoint. Again, it comes down to cost, but
I think just having a mark of what it would be for our discussion.
Okay. I think we could pull some numbers together on that. Also, I did, as part of the bipartisan stuff, talked with DOT about the possibility of adding the West Street extension into that, and they shot that down because it's new construction versus repair.
The only other thing, this is minor, but making sure the manholes are properly at proper depth, that's just ridiculous.
I do know that manhole adjustments are part of the DOT project, so, for what that's worth.
any other questions, comments? All right, consideration of awarding bid for microsurfacing. Anybody have any questions for Jason on this one?
Only question was timing. Start, finish.
Finish was October? Obviously, they know they have to work around school, so. The hope, and I talked with the PM the other day, the hope is to have this done before school is back in. Gordy, I think where you were going with your question is, they have worked for the village prior.
That's all I needed to know. I mean, as long as I don't wanna have another sidewalk debacle again. That's understood. I'm just, you know what I'm saying, I wanna be careful, that's all.
And I know it's not foolproof, but we do have that qualifier, that they have to fill out before we actually accept their bids anymore. So the sidewalk debacle was part of the initiative on that, and hopefully we don't have those situations again.
Exactly.
Jason and Tim are doing their due diligence to vet these people out before they ever do work in our community again.
Sounds fine to me, thank you.
Make a motion. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I make a motion to, award the 2022 microsurfacing project to Farnar Asphalt for $137,928.
Second that.
First, I think, any other discussion? Sorry. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Consideration of amendment to development, agreement for the lofts pertaining to acceptance of public utilities and granting of occupancy. Pretty easy one. Oversight that we were requiring everything to be done before they could have occupancy of one building.
It's pretty straightforward. I guess the only question is whether or not you want to have us approve it now and subject to us writing up the agreement and then you already being authorized to sign off on it, or if you'd rather have us come back and have the board look at it first.
I personally don't think that we need the board to look at this again.
It's pretty straightforward.
I think it's just something that should just be in there. It should have been in from the beginning.
We'll make a motion to direct the attorney to draft an amendment to the development agreement and authorize the president to sign it, provided the language is acceptable to the village administrator and attorney.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, offer to purchase, village-owned property in TID number 4. Consider approval of release of land from Bryan and consider offer to purchase, for approximately 9.9 acres. Any questions on this one? 9.9 acre one.
I guess my question is, and I, from the times I've been taught that our industrial to residential, usually you would have homes, you would go multifamily, commercial business, light industrial, heavy industrial. Now, I don't know, we've gone now from multifamily to, I don't know what you would call the storage lockers, but we're going to industrial. Now, I'm assuming there is not going to be residential in there, because we don't want to have that.
No, this is all within our business park.
I understand.
We wouldn't have residential in our business park outside of what we have for
I just had to ask the question. I apologize, but, you know, I'm just, sometimes I don't like to assume things.
You need one motion or two. Make a motion to approve the Bryan release.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Make a motion to approve the Lofts offer to purchase.
I'll second that.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, on to Corian.
1A, were we gonna do any further discussion on proposed capital budgets? Right?
We're gonna
No,
do
that-
that on June 20th.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's the one we're talking about when we discuss it with staff and what projects are coming up and have that
Okay.
discussion.
I think there's a couple of people here who are here for that tonight.
Oh, okay.
So, okay, thank you.
How about the, Max Apparel development and closing items? Consideration of extension of offer to purchase, consideration of development agreement and, East Roy LLC, consideration of resolution 2022-08, approving the sale of 8.78 acres of village-owned land and authorizing the execution of all documents to effectuate the transaction.
I think she wrote it that way on purpose.
Yeah.
You're killing me with the name of the place.
I
I'm gonna
think I
throw
took
all
that
that in there.
probably from our law firm. That doesn't sound like something I came up with on my own.
So, Chris, do you wanna explain the extension of the offer to purchase? 'Cause we don't have the packet materials for that, 'cause we were waiting for that document still.
Yeah, so where we stand is that they're hoping, their plan as of right now is still close on the 15th. There's still a couple of things they're trying to get lined up. I talked to the attorney this afternoon, he still's confident that that's a hard deadline. So our thought was that this was sort of the last meeting that we've got before that date. And as part of the closing process, we need to get a resolution from the village board authorizing the sale of the property. Title company knows that it's been approved. Technically though, the offer to purchase actually expired at the end of May, I guess it was. So we're outside of that window. So what we want to do is do an extension just to kind of keep the documents current, get those approved. Paul Sherburne, who's the attorney for the developer, is going to send over an amendment. He likes this form, but he just didn't get a chance to do it yet today. So what we'd have you guys do is authorize, probably Eileen, to execute an amendment to the offer to purchase. I'd say we go through the end of June, just in case the 15th to push back a week or so. And that would allow her to approve the extension so that that's out there. And the last step would be the development agreement itself, which we think is finalized, but there's been a couple of changes that I wanted the bank to, they requested a couple of changes that frankly I didn't like, having to do with the way their interests would be subordinated to the villages. They were kind of carving out some stuff that I didn't think was appropriate.
You talking about the bank?
Yeah. Yep, so Paul went back to them to see if we can make those changes, but he hasn't heard back yet. So again, given the timing here, if we want to have this thing approved before, without having to have a special meeting between now and your next regular meeting, and if we're possibly going to close on the 15th, we thought we could get an approval from the board tonight to approve the agreement subject to any final revisions that Eileen and I may go over.
Do you want it to extend it to the 15th or the 30th? All right, I will make a motion. Do you want 3 motions? All right. I'll make a motion to extend the offer to purchase to 6/30, allowing the village attorney administrator to approve minor modifications prior to signing.
Second that.
Now, for every aspect of this, does anybody have any questions? No? All those in favor of the first motion?
Aye.
Opposed?
Make a motion to approve the development agreement. Modification. Subject to any village attorney or administrator minor modifications prior to signing.
And all those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Carries.
Same verbiage on the resolution. Motion to approve the resolution authorizing the sale of the parcel.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, moving on to ordinances and resolution. Resolution 2022-08. Yeah, we did. Ordinance 2022-06, update language on Chapter 470, Waste Management, Article 2, Recycling.
Motion to approve ordinance 2022-06.
I'll second.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Carries. Resolution 22-09, approving 2021 compliance maintenance annual report.
Oh, I'll make a motion to recommend approval of ordinance 2022-06. Oh, I'm sorry, that was electronic recycling. I apologize. Yes, it's 09. 2022-09, sorry.
All those in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. All right, on to reports. Emergency minutes from 4/12, 5/2, and 5/5. Any questions on any of that? 40.
I had a question in regards to emergency services.
Yes, which one?
It doesn't matter. It's all or any. Because I know we've talked about the lifespan of this ladder truck, you said is gonna be another 4 or 5 years, correct, Joe? Correct. And at that time then, if we're going to have a ladder truck in our fire district, we're gonna have to buy a new one, correct? Correct. And I guess my question is, and I'm sure that they're very smart and able on that district, and they're gonna be planning for setting aside funds every year for purchase of a truck? Just asking.
It was actually in.
I was on the board a long time ago when they just came to us for a new fire truck, and it's like there was nothing set aside.
My only question, and we don't have to get into details here, but just for our next follow-up, when I had been out there, we talked about some capital improvements needed for the firehouse specific building. Is that baked into what we?
I'll make a motion to adjourn the closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute 1985 1E to conduct other specified public business whenever competitive bargaining reasons require a closed session, personal matter, and liquidated damages 2021 street construction project. Roll call?
Okay, President Seeger.
Yes.
Trustee Alexander. Yes. Trustee Johnson. Yes. Trustee Nugent. Yes. Trustee Renucci.
Yes.
Trustee Smalley. Yes. Trustee Wisniewski. Yes. Thank you.